Hello, everyone, and welcome to third episode of Good Talk, New Lines Magazine's Instagram live series of conversations. My name is Riada Akyol. I'm Strategic Initiatives Editor, and I'm so excited about hosting Nuria Garcia Masip from. I'm just gonna invite her now. She is here. Hi, Nuria.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you? As I just said, this is third episode of Good Talk, New Lines Magazine, Instagram live series of conversation. My name is Riada Akyol. I'm Strategic Initiatives Editor, and Nuria is a master calligrapher joining us from Paris today. I will let Nuria tell us a little bit more about herself, but just a little bit. Nuria was born in Spain, grew up between United States and Spain. She holds a master's in art history from Sorbonne University, won prestigious awards in international calligraphy competitions, and her work forms part of various private and museum collections. She has also organized different workshops, numerous conferences on this art to promote the art of calligraphy internationally. And her work is rooted in the classical school because she enjoys preserving techniques. And we will talk about all of this. I want to first say hello, welcome, and how are you today, Nuria?
Thank you very much. Very happy to be with you today. It's a beautiful day here in close to Paris, near Chartres. So very happy to spend a little bit of time talking to you.
Absolutely. And if I may, I just want to tell to our audiences that I see a lot of beautiful waves. The only reason why I'm going to just now turn them off is because we are going to post this on YouTube afterwards so that it looks nicer and without distraction in that format as well. Nuria, we have international audience from around the world. Some of them might be familiar with your work with the gorgeous art of Islamic calligraphy, but some might not know much. So the first question, rather than me reading from your biography, I just wanted to ask you about your personal reflection on how you started learning and then mastering this art of calligraphy. Was it some unexpected turn of events, and how did it go? Because I know it's not easy to become a calligrapher, let alone master calligrapher. So curious to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I always tell my students and people who ask that at the time when I started, it was late 90s, early 2000s. And at that time, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all the information we have today. So I didn't really know, when I started calligraphy, I didn't know very much about the living tradition. I was looking for a traditional art. I had done modern visual arts in the States, and I was looking for a way that I could sort of reconciliate my personal spiritual life and my artistic expression. So I wanted to look for something that had a sort of a sacred framework. And I went to Morocco and I studied the traditional arts. I met a self-taught calligrapher and I thought, oh, this is so beautiful. It's so simple, you know, you just have like an inkwell, paper, a kalam, you know, the reed pen, and that's it. And I can do this anywhere. That's really what attracted me. And then I realized I needed a teacher who had a teacher who had a teacher, right? So who belonged to this sort of chain of transmission. And through friends in DC, they recommended that I go study with Mohammed Zakaria, who's a very well-known, famous American calligrapher. And so I went back to DC. I started with Mohammed Zakaria for 2 years. And then I continued with his teacher in Istanbul, Hassan Chalabi, and Hassan Chalabi's own student, Master Calligrapher Daoud Bektash, who became my main teacher for all the years that I spent in Istanbul.
You mentioned DC, and I'm currently in DC, so I'm sorry that I so wish we could have gone for a cup of tea. What was the reason of your visit recently, as I learned?
Yeah, so we had a very beautiful event that actually commemorated Mohammed Zakaria's 80th birthday. And we had an exhibit, which is still going on until June 20th at the Qatar America Institute for Culture, right next to DuPont Circle. It's a two-level exhibit with Mohammed Zakaria's work and then his students, Nihat Dukan, Aisha Holland, Dennis Oktem Bektash, Daoud Bektash, who's a great master calligrapher from Turkey, my teacher as well. and Josh Bearer, and my student Khalid Casado, who I gave Ijaza 2 years back. So it's a sort of a family of calligraphers that belong to the same chain of transmission. And then we had a symposium and different events, that workshops and so on. So it was really a very, very special event. Yeah, and I encourage whoever's in DC to go and visit the exhibit, which is still on until June 20th.
Next time I'm going to definitely, you have to send me in advance information when you come so we can get together in person. But I'm curious now that you spoke about it on your website as well. Visitors can see different sections that are entitled beautifully, like grace, love, constant remembrance, closer to you, oceans of ink, and etc. And you have verses of poem as well. So I was wondering, besides obviously those verses from the Quran and the poems that obviously probably you like for some reason, how do you choose the work that you produce? How do you choose what you're going to work on next?
It's actually, you know, in Turkish we say it's a bit of a kismet, you know, but destiny. Many times I have like a list of verses that I like from the Quran. I'm very inspired by sacred scripture. I have to say that is my main source of inspiration. But by verses that I find very universal, that anyone coming from whichever background or religion can relate to, and verses that talk about the sacred, about remembrance, and sort of the more spiritual dimensions. And then obviously there's poetry, which I also love very much. And sometimes many pieces are also the result of commissions. So somebody, you know, wants a special surah or verse or poem or so on, and they will come to me with, you know, with a text. And then it's up to me to come up with the best composition and the, you know, the best sort of solution, quote unquote, to make a piece inspired by the verse.
And I think that it's so important for those who are obviously not that familiar to understand, as I was reminded while preparing for this interview, how much of all sorts of different readings do the calligraphers have they had to read in the past and today as well. And I've learned that they almost had to have encyclopedic knowledge of different kinds of Muslim cultural heritage, as I've read in some academic articles, from astronomy to mathematics, obviously, to law, philosophy. So I was wondering, what kinds of those additional readings and writings do you read to find more inspiration beyond this sacred aspect that you just mentioned?
Yes, so I have to say that in history, it is true what you say, that calligraphers were extremely learned, you know, they were very well versed in Islamic sciences and so on. And some of the older master calligraphers, you know, they were Hafiz, for instance, you know, they had memorized the entire Quran and so on. Today, I have to say that that is no longer the case. We are not all very well versed in all sciences and so on. And I think it depends on the calligrapher. Some calligraphers are, we can see that, real intellectuals. I think of Ustad Amir Khani, who's one of the best calligraphers from Iran. He was always in the sort of intellectual circles of Iran, and you know, very good friends with all, you know, the best musicians, the best philosophers, and so on. And that is something that was the case for a long time. In new generations, I think that's actually one of the challenges we have as calligraphers, to remember that we need to educate ourselves, and we need to, because it's true, it comes to the point where you need inspiration, and you need to dig deeper. If not, you know, we have the we can fall very easily into the trap of going into the cliche, you know, writing always the same verses, the same sentences, which happens sometimes as well. So I really think it's one of the things that it's a good reminder that calligraphers should should represent this aspect of learning. And for instance, Mohammad Zakaria is an example of that. It's someone who has been studying relentlessly, always, you know, he can read, you know, all these different languages, Ottoman, Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and he can write Ottoman Turkish letters to his teachers and so on, which is really remarkable, especially being self-taught, which is one of the most sort of incredible
or admirable
characteristics of Mohammad Zakaria.
You are known as the master calligrapher today, and I would like to ask you a bit about the history and that role of women as calligraphers throughout history? Because I've read different angles. I've read some scholarly articles, and I assume the content maybe depends on the authors who've written it, in the sense that some academic articles have emphasized that there is comparatively little documentation on women who have practiced calligraphy, but there are still references, particularly after the modern period of the Ottoman Empire. But then I've also read articles that speak about the great role of women in the chain of transmission, as there were so many of them from the Golden Age onwards. I even read that Prophet's wife was an excellent calligrapher. And so I assume that the truth is somewhere in between, that it was complicated. But what is your perspective, considering that you're also a historian, about the female calligraphers and their role throughout history?
Yes, I think we need to be realistic in the sense that females throughout history, obviously they participated actively in the intellectual life of different societies during different periods. But obviously they were a minority. We cannot pretend that they were, as numerous, as important as the men. But there are, especially in the scholarly circles, there were a lot of women who were transmitting the Islamic sciences, who were teaching the Islamic sciences. And many of these women were known for their beautiful calligraphy. And there are certain women in the silsila, as you mentioned, which are considered, they are actually the link, between Yaqut al-Mustasimi and Ibn Muqla and Ibn Bawab. So, and then we have, noble women, princesses and so on, who are known for their beautiful calligraphy. But for instance, in Islamic Spain, we have the whole tradition of the copyists. And this is where we can make this distinction between a calligrapher who is sort of creating these sort of master works for monumental works, and calligraphers who are working more on the books and on the art of copying books, which are sort of different levels. And at the level of copyists, there were, I think in Islamic Spain and in the 10th, 11th century in Spain, in Cordoba, they talk about 127 women scribes who were specialized in copying. And there were many sort of noble families who would have a freed slave, for instance, woman, who would be the one taking care of all the correspondence and writing and so on. So definitely the female calligrapher has been active throughout history. But I actually think today it is a very masculine world. And we have a lot of women students, but we have very few women professional female calligraphers. And that's where I think we need to sort of encourage each other and support each other. I wasn't conscious of it when I started calligraphy. I was very naive. I never even thought about the fact that I was a woman. I just wanted to do calligraphy. And my teachers never made me feel that because I was a woman, it was going to be harder. But once I became professional, it's when I started to realize that, yes, that there's a lot of, still, we are a minority, so we try to support each other and do the best work we can.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons that I was so excited when you accepted being here today, considering both your prolific work and scholarly background, and precisely this conversation, which I wanted to come forward so that our audiences can be aware, so that there can be some movement in the direction that you mentioned. So I was curious, how did you pass the pandemic lockdowns? Now summer, it seems everybody is going out. And then it reminded me of the retreat and withdrawal that we all had to do in a way. So I was wondering, when preparing for this interview, was that like to your advantage in a way, that we all had to be inside, and was that kind of conducive to more of your production, or was it almost uninspiring? Was the silence uninspiring in a way?
No. I've spoken a lot to fellow calligraphers, and we were like, oh, this is just life as usual, because we live very secluded lives as calligraphers, and then we do go out into the world for exhibits, for classes, and so on. So that was maybe what changed for me. Like, I didn't have. I do travel quite a bit for calligraphic events and so on. That wasn't happening. So it's actually very nice to have even more time at my desk, because I think if you ask any calligrapher, we're all glued to our tables. And, you know, if they didn't force us out, this is where we want to be, writing and working. It's very, it's a vocation, you know. I think any artist, you know, if you're doing it out of a vocation, the more you do it, the happier you are. So so the pandemic was very positive in that way. Obviously, there was the tragic side, because I had family, you know, or friends who were suffering. That was difficult. But then as artists, what we do is we take refuge in our art. So, you know, I found beautiful verses that were about healing or about protection. And you know, so it was quite inspiring in that sense. I remember it with, I mean, it was a very special time. I think for a lot of people, it was a time for reflection and recollection. And yeah, it was all in all very, very positive.
That's so interesting, because it made me think about when you were talking about that relationship also with your tools. I'm curious, we often speak about the verses or the inspiration for the work that you do, but I also thought about the pens, the brushes, the meaning that each one of those tools can have for an artist, probably. So I was wondering, how do you choose? Which ones do you work with? Do you have a favorite one? I assume, obviously, for those who know, there are special ones used for special technique, etc. script, but and the same goes for paper and the ink, correct? These are the elements that you choose. So how do you choose that?
Well, I mean, this is a little bit technical. When we are students, and yesterday I was giving a workshop in Paris, and we were talking about this precisely. When you're a student, you have your favorite column, and that's the only column that you can use. And if anybody gives you anything else, you're completely, you know, blown away, and you have to recut the same column, you know, and the column becomes very small because it's the only one you can use, and so on. Then as calligraphers, obviously, finally we write with all sorts of columns, all sizes, and it's actually the piece that tells us what column we need to use. The size, is it going to be larger, smaller? And then I do have certain types of paper that I really like. Now I've become very picky with my paper. For the longest time, I made my own art paper, coating it and sizing it and so on. Now I get it from a very nice paper shop in Istanbul, and so they have, you know, Korean and Japanese and so on, and so I have my selection that I like to go to. But the goal actually for calligraphers, finally, is that we should be able to write anywhere with any column on any surface. I mean, basically, it's you shouldn't be too attached to those aspects. You know, they say finally it's all in the hand and in the technique and so on. So we have to be flexible in that way.
You see, that's so. I'm saying that you're saying we should not be too attached, or you should be flexible. Is it? You're probably familiar. I read that in the past, it was not rare that because of so much work that a calligrapher would do, that it was, I think, Schimmel, sorry if I read it incorrectly, or Schimmel, who wrote that, quote, a pious calligrapher might order his funeral washing to be heated by this wood, a custom dating back as early as 12th century. An interesting aspect suggesting how the calligrapher actually becomes one with her art, the word of God, and thus with the world and the universe. So I assume, end of quote, that's not happening today, but it was so.
No, it is happening. It is happening. We all keep the shavings of the column. So when we open the column, there are the sort of the shavings, I think we say in English, and we keep that always. And so all calligraphers have like a big, large pot with all the shavings from all the columns that they've cut. And the idea is that when you die, that will be used to burn it, and with the wood, heat the water that will be used to wash the body. So that is the goal. I mean, I hope somebody will do that for me. I need to write it on my will. But I mean, that is what calligraphers still do. It's part of the tradition. Yeah.
Wow, how powerful is that? Amazing. It's really powerful. But so you have won so many prestigious prizes in international calligraphy competitions, and I recently saw that you so kindly and warmly posted on your Instagram account many words of congratulations to other women calligraphers who have won or achieved success in some recent competition. So it made me think as well how we talk to individual calligraphers, we talk about individual calligraphers, but seeing your messages then made me think about the community of calligraphers. And you did mention it a little bit about your reunion a few weeks ago here, but can you tell us more about that global scene? How often do these gatherings happen? Are you in touch? How is it to be together and see that work in person? And is it an opportunity to exchange ideas? What is that community like?
Yeah, so the community starts with our teachers, right? So for many years it starts with knowing the fellow students who are studying with you, with your teacher and so on. And I remember when I first went to Istanbul, I was so focused on just studying that all I would do is see my teacher, see the students that were in that class, and that was it. And I would go back and work and work. Then once I received my ijaza, my calligraphy certificate, then I started to participate in competitions, but also exhibitions. And the exhibitions that are organized, many of them are state-sponsored in Turkey and Iran and the Gulf countries, Dubai, especially Kuwait. So they would organize, you know, like every 2 years, a large exhibition, or once a year. And those were the opportunities. Well, they still are, but after, you know, we've had this pandemic, which is this big parenthesis. Now things are picking up again. Those are the main moments where everybody comes together, and then you meet other calligraphers, you look at their work, you critique. In the evenings, you know, everybody's doing meshks and showing to each other and getting feedback from the masters and so on. And so the main benefit of those events are actually the exchange. In Istanbul, which is where I studied, it's very, very alive. I mean, exhibits happen like almost once a month, you know, there's so many. And calligraphy, illumination, miniature, all sorts. So it's a very thriving community. And then obviously there are families, right? So certain, you know, depending on the chain of transmission, certain groups, you know, see each other more, other groups, you know, but in any case, it's really a way to be inspired and to learn always, because they always say your learning does not end with the ijaza. Basically, it begins. I mean, your professional life begins with the ijaza. So it's very, very important you keep the relationship with the master and with other calligraphers. I mean, being in isolation, one runs the risk of losing objectivity with your own work. You always need an exterior critique to keep improving. And so this is a lifelong journey for all calligraphers.
So there's an aspect of almost humility that I sense in terms of, or I'm curious in the sense that we know before that the education was based on this master apprentice experience relationship. So and so if I'm getting correct, it's the same today in a way as. And also, what is the measurement of, is there some standard within the community about success? Is it, before I used to read, it's the number maybe of the Qurans that was written, or how many copies? How does it work today?
Yeah, today it's very difficult to measure success. Because first of all, I don't know anybody who's written, you know, 40 Qurans, or like Sheikh Hamdullah, you know, at his time. That's no longer the case, unfortunately. So, but of course, one would say the great master calligraphers, they've all, of course, taught many students, given many ijazas, done pieces for architectural, you know, for mosques and fountains, and, you know, so I think that would be, you know, taking into account their years of experience, the amount of students, the amount of pieces they've done, you know, all the work they have produced. That's the way. We have these calligraphy competitions which have become quite popular, but they're mostly for the sort of younger generations, right? After they've gotten their ijaza, it's a way to become known, no? To show that you have a certain level, which, I mean, I did after I received my ijaza, and many of my colleagues did the same. But I would say that's more sort of in the beginning of the journey. And then once you progress as a calligrapher, it's really about transmission, I would say, no? How much you transmit through your work, through your teaching, and through all the sort of related activities that one does. Yeah.
So in that sense, if we speak about the chain of transmission, as I've said at the beginning, from what I've learned, you belong, if that's the right linguistic way of saying it, to the classical school of calligraphy, and that you aim to preserve the techniques and materials of the tradition. So I'm curious, how has that changed? How are the methods to produce calligraphic pieces changing? And one more reason why I'm asking is because we talk about the digital world, digital changes in so many spheres, and I've read also about different young, if I read correctly, Egyptian calligrapher Khadija El Hawass, or others probably, who use digital technology to draw on street art, to produce graffiti. So I'm curious about these differences and how that technological change or progress has influenced the production and the result of calligraphy.
It's a very good question, and a very important one, because I always say, you know, I didn't start calligraphy to be glued to a computer doing Photoshop and, you know, Adobe Illustrator. I started calligraphy precisely because of the materiality of it, the beauty, the simplicity. But of course, it's a very individual choice. So I always insist on the fact that, you know, we have all these different currents today. We have sort of modern contemporary artists doing hurufia, you know, which started in the 60s and the 70s. So sort of paintings inspired by letters, but they're not calligraphers, they're painters or multimedia artists who are exploring letter forms. That's one thing. Then we have graffiti artists, you know, street art and so on. That's another thing. And then we have, you know, classical calligraphers. So I think we can all coexist without having one art sort of interfere with the other one. And I think that the problem starts when classical calligraphers feel that they need to be modern, right? Meaning, if you want to go and pursue modern art, of course, by all means, but that shouldn't it shouldn't create a sort of a hybrid classical modern calligraphy with strange rules that are imposed on it. And I don't want to get too technical because it's a very complex topic, but one of the things that is happening is that because classical calligraphers are working with architects for mosque projects and so on, they've had to use Illustrator, Photoshop, and so on to vectorize sort of monumental pieces, so it's laser cut into wood or metal and so on. So that's a very, I find, legitimate use of technology, obviously, for a huge architectural piece. Then when it comes to the sort of your own art pieces, no? So calligraphic panels that are going to be hung in the wall and so on, I find it a little bit dangerous that the technology is going to influence that craftsmanship of the sort of the art piece that we produce by hand with all these beautiful materials, and that I feel it should, from my point of view, be really a product of the artist's hands and not a product of a computer program. So while technology can be a tool for certain projects, I feel strongly that it's important that for the artistic production of the calligrapher, that we stay sort of loyal to the kalam, to the reed pen, to the paper, to the ink, because finally that's the root of calligraphy. And so how far can we go? You know, it's what keeps us rooted to the art are those materials which have been used since the 7th century. You know, it's incredible that the first Qurans were written with a reed pen, and we're still writing with a reed pen. It's just a very humble reed that is open in the same way and cut in the same way. And I find that I find there's a beautiful energy, apart from beautiful symbolism. So I think it's important that we give that its due, and that of course there's room for other explorations, but that remains active as well.
It is obvious that Nuria is a member of the classical tradition for belonging to that. But
yes.
You know, these are conversations that go on, I think, in so many circles about the changes the technology is bringing. Some good, some bad, how to coexist, how to preserve the good, take the take the beneficial from the new things that come along. So I think that these conversations are ongoing, and I think that also we have to. I mean, one question that I wanted to ask you is, because I know that you organize a lot of workshops and conferences to promote this art. My question, and I was curious, what are your experiences and impressions about the reaction of different audiences that you get? Because, I mean, something is a fact that there are different younger audiences that are just, I'm not going to say bombarded, but the world that they live in, obviously, in order for them to get attracted to learn more about what you said, is they have to be different ways. So regardless of that youth aspect, I was just curious about the reactions of different audiences from around the world to your conferences and workshops that you organize or participate in.
No, I think precisely, it's very interesting that people respond to the beauty of the traditional calligraphy. Like, we don't need to dumb it down for people. When somebody takes a kalam and the ink and so on, they immediately go into a mode, which, I mean, it's almost nostalgic, you know? It's not the same if you give them a marker or spray paint, you know? So I think they really appreciate having that space and doing something which is ancestral. And we see that in many domains, where people feel this sort of need to go back to the roots, to go back to the past, and so on. And so I think in that sense, people actually respond to that beauty, to that simplicity. And then, of course, it doesn't prevent them from doing other artistic projects, you know, with graffiti or other things, you know. But I think that's why I keep insisting that we need to coexist. Like, we need both. We need the modern and artists doing that. And then we need the classical, which is another aspect. And, you know, I think they're complementary in a sense. So people always appreciate having that. And these 2-day workshop that I was giving, precisely, I had complete beginners, you know, French participants, you know, with absolutely no background. And immediately it was really remarkable how they responded to the having to slow down, having to control their breath, having to hold the kalam. You know, so it was like therapeutic for them. And they really, really responded, you know, it resonated with them.
Yeah. It made me, well, I saw one of the works that you did that absolutely resonated with me. It's one of the my favorite verses. You may think that what's good for you is bad for you. You may think that what's bad for you is good for you. And I saw one of your works there. So it definitely, I mean, you say simplicity, but I look at that and I'm like, oh, whoa, this is not simple. That's so intricate, so specific. You can see how much time and effort is needed to produce such a work. But I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to ask just 1-2 more questions, and maybe see there are 2 questions there. I saw the news in December last year that UNESCO and Arabic calligraphy, from the news that I read, a key tradition, as we know, in the Arab and Islamic worlds, was added to its intangible cultural heritage list at the end of December last year. And I have to admit, again, as somebody who read that news, I was just a little bit confused. So I apologize if it sounds trivial to you and the other experts, but I didn't quite understand about the emphasis of Arabic calligraphy. And then I saw somewhere else calligraphy. And then I thought, does that mean that there is some sort of rivalry between Ottoman and Arabic calligraphy? Is this a delicate question? Is the politics? I was just curious about these internal dynamics because I was a little bit confused.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of politics. Yeah,
right.
Like everything, you know, everything becomes very nationalistic. So Turkey presented Husnu Hat, right? So beautiful calligraphy to UNESCO. And it was accepted. And so I think almost simultaneously, as soon as Saudi Arabia heard, they put together, I think it was 17 Arab countries, and they presented Arabic calligraphy. I think, and then I don't know what the Iranians did, but I think they also wanted to do something for nostalgic. And I think that the best term would actually be Arabic script calligraphy. If they don't want to use the term Islamic, which would actually be the most correct, because Islamic means any culture from, you know, Al-Andalus to sub-Saharan Africa to Indonesia and everything in between, you see. So it's a huge, vast geographic area where Arabic script has been used for calligraphy. So so it should have been maybe Arabic script calligraphy, to emphasize the fact that many languages are written with this alphabet. But in any case, I think all in all, it's a positive thing, because it made a lot of people conscious of the importance of this art, the fact that it's still alive and so on. And here in France, for instance, I've already been contacted by 2 different companies about, you know, wanting to do things in relation to Arabic calligraphy. So I don't think we can be too picky about terminology, and just be positive about the fact that it's being promoted, and you know, hopefully it will make it better known and more appreciated.
Yeah. Oh, before I don't want to forget this question, because I'm so curious about it. Is it true? Oh goodness, where is it? Oh yeah, is it true that, in your opinion, that prospective calligraphers, and maybe this can be a message for the end to prospective or those who are interested as well, again by Schimmel, that he said prospective calligraphers are supposed to be, quote unquote, of sweet character and unassuming disposition. What is your opinion about that?
Well, I mean, you know, there are, in the sources, we have a lot of things like this that say, you know, good character is related to good handwriting. So if you have bad character, you cannot. And finally, what happens is that calligraphy keeps you humble, because it's such a difficult art that, I mean, you can never, I don't know any master calligrapher who's proud of a piece that he's done, you know, like we always see the shortcomings, we always see that it can be improved. And so we always have this consciousness that we are far below what we should be doing, no? And that's what actually keeps us active, because it's a challenge, right? So you're perpetually challenged to do better. So in that sense, I think, yes, that can work in positively on our character. Having said that, not all calligraphers are, you know, we're all human beings, and we all have our shortcomings and so on.
Right. So thank you so much. I just want to say there are 2 questions. One, if you want to answer now, or I don't know, is it complicated? Somebody asked, please let me know which ink is the best among all, and is there any provision which allows ijaza only? I don't know, is that a super technical
what is the okay, the ink, and
yes.
How is that related to the ijaza?
Which ink is the best among all, and is there any provision which allows ijaza only? So it's
I don't understand that last part of ijaza
okay,
only, but
well,
the ink, you know, we use a traditional Sud ink, and we have very good Turkish inks, Iranian inks. There's even water-based Japanese inks, which are good, and they should just try different ones. And depends if you're writing large script, small script, the size of the pen, the paper. It all, actually, when we write a piece, depending on the paper, sometimes I change the type of ink that I use, because it grabs on slightly differently. So, but they can go to any sort of specialized store and consult.
I think we opened up, touched many different important, interesting topics. Maybe we opened up new conversations that can continue within the community. This was such a pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited. This was the first Instagram live chat that Nuria also joined. I
Yes.
hope it was a good experience for you. To the other question about whether there will be a replay, yes, there will be a replay of this on New Lines Magazine YouTube page and on Instagram, I think later this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope we see each other soon. All the best. And to the audience,
yes,
and everybody
thank you.
else.
Thank you very much. And I hope next time we'll be in person.
Of
Thank
course,
you again.
I really am excited. Yes, thank you so much for following us. Stay tuned for another good talk next week, and follow New Lines Magazine. Have a good day. Bye.